Binge or Bin from Independent TV, giving you the lowdown on which TV shows are binge-worthy and which ones are bin-worthy.
But this episode, we're doing things a little differently. Did you know that TVs can be the most power-hungry devices in our homes? In this special episode, in association with E.ON Next, we're reducing our screen time and expanding our minds by sharing with you the books we think you should be reading in a bid to explore mindful, energy-saving habits.
Annabel!
Jacob, how's it going?
Yeah, very good, thank you. I've been reading a lot of books this week.
Well, that makes for a change.
I know, and this week we're actually joined by Jessie.
Hi.
Hi, Jessie.
Hi, Annabel.
So, as our resident bookworm, Jessie is going to be giving us some recommendations based on books that we love.
That's right, Annabel. I think reading is good for the soul. And sometimes, it's nice to just take a break from screens anyway. So, what have you both been reading?
So, I have been reading Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This book was written in 2005, but it's set in the 90s. It's actually a dystopian book, so when you're reading it, it feels like it's set in the future. Perfect film material, really, because it was made into a film 5 years after it was released, 2010, starring Keira Knightley, Andrew Garfield, and Carey Mulligan. The plot of the book is kind of a closely guarded secret. If you read the back, it doesn't really tell you what it's about, so I don't really want to give away the full plot. But it's about three friends who went to a school in Hailsham, and how their lives intertwine with one another. But what happened at the school in Hailsham is where the dystopia comes into it.
None of you will do anything except live the life that has already been set out for you. And sometime around your third donation, your short life will be complete. That's what you're created to do.
You think it's like a sweeping romance, and then you read it and you realise swiftly it isn't that at all. Ishiguro is a fantastic writer. I think Remains in a Day is one of my favourite books and films. But this one is just so interesting and so well laid out. It's like split into three parts, and each one explores a different facet of the story, and it's like quite a secretive plot, isn't it? And then each part doles out like a little bit more as it goes.
We didn't have to look into your souls. We had to see if you had souls at all.
I'm so glad that you chose this, Jacob, because Never Let Me Go is one of my absolute favourite books.
No way.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think the film is brilliant, but there's just something about the way that Ishiguro writes. It's very hypnotic, and it kind of like builds and builds and builds. If people like Never Let Me Go, I would definitely recommend Clara and the Sun, which is Ishiguro's most recent novel, which was longlisted for the Booker Prize. There's a young girl called Josie, and she is bought an artificial friend, which is kind of like artificial intelligence, called Clara, who kind of looks after her, and it's about their bond, but there's also something sinister going on. Are these robots kind of going to take over the world? But it's also about these grander questions of like, what does it mean to have a soul, and could technology have a soul? And it's definitely his best book since Never Let Me Go. It has that amazing tone. I don't know if you find this, Jacob, where it's quite like calming almost, but you know that there's something quite unsettling going on underneath. And what about you, Annabelle? What have you been reading?
So I have been reading, or rather rereading, Irvine Welsh's 1993 book Trainspotting, which I have lost my copy of, possibly on a train, possibly not.
It's okay, got one here.
That's the one. Of course, it's also a wildly popular, brilliant film by Danny Boyle, which was made, 3 years later in 1996. Now the two have kind of sort of become synonymous with one another. It's really hard to read the book without thinking of Ewan McGregor and Kelly MacDonald and Johnny Lee Miller. But this was one of those rare occasions where I had actually seen the film first and then read the book afterwards. And I think that was mostly because I was, really intrigued to see what kind of wild source material would spawn like a film adaptation like this.
What's on the menu this evening, sir?
Yeah, it just felt so new. It wasn't like anything I had read before. I didn't grow up in the UK, and I think this was my sort of, very British book that I had read that wasn't like a period piece. So this was kind of like a baptism of fire like that. It was the first time I had read something that also sounded like that. It's that kind of mix of English, and you've also got the dialogue in Scots as well, and that definitely took some getting used to, and it's a lot harder to kind of grapple with if you're not used to it reading it than, you know, hearing it on screen. But when you do get the hang of it took me a few chapters, but it starts to become, you know, second nature, and it just builds into the story so well. It's so immersive, and I mean, it's just another way of getting your readers like really into that time and place, which was late 80s Edinburgh. This is also dealing with pretty bleak material, namely like drug addiction. And I mean, there's tough themes, but I think what's so special about the book and what translated so well in the film adaptation is, you know, that dark humor, and also Danny Boyle like not being afraid to kind of take those creative risks and put to screen some of the, you know, the moments in the book that other directors might have been like, oh, that's too much.
Choose your future. Choose life.
Have you got any recommendations for me based on that?
Yeah, so the first one I would recommend based on that is called Don't Look Back in Anger, The Rise and Fall of Cool Britannia. And it's basically an oral history of that cultural moment in the 90s when Trainspotting the novel and the film came out. So it's got lots of the main players of the time. You've got new Labour figures, you've got artists, writers, journalists, and it really recreates that era that Trainspotting was set in. But also Irvine Welsh is one of the voices in the book. So he gives his view on things that happened in the 90s, but he also gives an insight into the making of Trainspotting, the film. So he talks about how low budget it was and how they were begging, like Damon Albarn, Jarvis Cocker, lots of different people to contribute music to the soundtrack, which obviously went on to become so iconic. So the book is just very evocative of that whole era, and if you love the book, I think you'd really enjoy it. It really creates the spirit of that time, this, like you say, this thrilling new voice, this novel. And then the next one I would recommend is Milkman by Anna Burns. As you were saying, Annabelle, so much of Trainspotting is about tuning into Irvine Welsh's writing and the voice, and the way that his characters speak. So it's set in Northern Ireland at the height of the Troubles. It's about a young 18-year-old woman who has this sinister older married man in her life, people call the Milkman. But the reason I've chosen it is that Anna Burns' writing in lots of ways reminds me of Irvine Welsh. It's not quite dialect, but it's a voice that you really have to tune into, quite unique, almost like a stream of consciousness. So we're following the character's psychology. I think in terms of a really unique voice, an exciting style that takes you to really unexpected places, a bit like in Trainspotting, I think readers would also really like Milkman.
Thanks so much for watching Binge or Bin. We hope you enjoyed our book special in association with E.ON Next.
Yeah, that's lots and lots of great book recommendations to keep you going until we see you again next time. Like and comment below and subscribe for more from Independent TV.